by the Archdiocesan Research Center, but we do have a lock of his hair. Now, I'm not really one to understand why you would have a lock of somebody's hair for that long, but it was a sign of endearment for Victorians in America, and they really did love the man, so they wanted to have a keepsake even like that, and we still have it at St. Joe's. Actually, I don't think it's actually behind Bill right now. The coffin plate is hanging in the president's office.
Right.
The lock of
Right.
hair is in the archives right now.
This next slide is a new acquisition to the Villiger Archives. We recently acquired this 18-inch by 14-inch original 1860 lithograph of the Reverend James A. Ryder of the Society of Jesus. Father Ryder was present in Philadelphia at the founding of St. Joseph's. He was our second president. Barbalin founded, and then Barbalin stepped away for a bit and came back. And Ryder in 1856-57 took over the reins of the prep. I believe it was Ryder who moved the prep up to up near City with the current site of City Hall briefly. Before we had to move back in the panic of, as a result of the Panic of 57. And Ryder also served as president of Holy Cross and 2 different stints as Georgetown University's president. And he died here in Philadelphia in 1860. This is Father Villiger. I didn't know Leo was going to bring show and tell. So this is the 1906 biography of the Reverend Bertrand Villiger of the Society of Jesus. It does not make Villiger out to be a saint in the same way I think that the writings about Father Barbalin really, quite frankly, call for his sainthood. Mm-hmm. But Father Villiger, of course, is most important, very important for us because, this happens in class all the time. Father Villiger, so important for us because while Barbalin was the founder in 51, Villiger was the first principal. Villiger was there on day one. And then when the Jesuits buy the land here in Green Hill in North Philadelphia in 1866 for $45,000, it is Bertrand Villiger, the Swiss Jesuit, Bertrand Villiger, who brings the school out here in 1868, builds the Jesu, founding pastor, builds the first small church, builds the Church of the Jesu. He's our president from 1868 to 1892. He says the first mass in the Jesu in October of 1888. And then he dies here in Philadelphia in 1902, and his funeral was in the Jesu, and all of the newspapers, not just the Catholic Standard and Times, but the Inquirer, the Bulletin, the Record, all report over 3,000 people packing the Jesu. No social distancing then. Packing the Jesu for Father Villiger's funeral. And so Villiger will pop up from time to time through this.
I wanted to emphasize too that out of these 2 main founders of our organization, they're both refugees, that they both did not want to leave their native countries. They both came to the United States not knowing how to speak English and learned how. I know that Villiger was sent to Conwego, Pennsylvania to go learn English when he arrives here, and had just been a seminarian, escaped the Civil War in Switzerland, one of the last armed conflicts that they had in Switzerland in 1847, 1848. So that does really shape kind of their perspective. That's an inescapable aspect of their psychology and the history of what they did and what they built, is that they always kind of had being chased out of their home countries in the back of their head too. And I think an interesting thing about Villiger, that the more that you read about him, you kind of see a larger than life personality, someone who was truly a builder, someone really interested in literally building stuff and creating new communities for Catholics in America, across the country too. Sent to California, spent time in Maryland, so not just in Philadelphia.
Right, he builds Santa Clara, correct, in California.
Yeah,
Does some building at Georgetown, correct?
had been a mission. Yeah, so Santa Clara is one of the original missions, but he's sent there and helps turn it into a university, expands the church. That the current version of the church that you would see out there, the mission, is actually the one after he built, because his version burned in the 20s. He's sent to what basically seems to become San Francisco University and builds out there as well. He builds in Frederick, Maryland. So it's kind of his MO. He gets sent around to raise money, make friends with wealthy people like the Drexels and the Bouviers, and try to hold a lot of retreats and events to raise money.
This lithograph was done in 1850. It's a pretty well-known lithograph. It's about 3 to 4 feet wide, 2 to 3 feet high. This is the copy that we acquired for the Villiger Archives, and it's actually our neighborhood before we're born. This is a balloon view, as if you were in a hot air balloon behind Founders Hall of Girard College, right? So that's the view looking toward town. The yellow arrow indicates Eastern State Penitentiary. You can see it's awfully close to the river. It's an artist's rendition, and the red arrow points to the steeple of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church. And of course, if you are from around the class of 1980 or earlier, you remember St. Matthew's. You may remember St. Matthew's sitting right on what's today the green lawn where guys play after school, in that the Jesu, the plaza parking lot in front of the church, and then there's the green lawn at the corner of 18th and Girard. And that church sat on half of that green lot. So it's a great landmark in this 1850 lithograph to show exactly where the prep would be built, where the Jesu, Church of the Jesu, would be built in 1850.
I wanted to add, can I add to something about
geez, more show and tell.
Yeah, I know. I knew I needed to outdo Bill in some way. This is really just a contest for us to try to one up each other. So,
I'm in the archives, so I have access to everything right now.
Well, it's whether or not you can find it, Bill. That's the question. Can you go back to the lithograph there?
Yeah.
I think this is best as a historian street fighting, man. This is
Yes,
turning out to be
exactly.
a much better event.
Exactly. See,
this is how we do it in Upper Darby.
Yeah. We were hoping that this would be the most thrilling of the what's the name of the series, Kevin? It's the
Conversations from 17th and Girard.
Okay.
Conversations 17th and Girard. All right. I love this lithograph, and I love that Bill finds all of this stuff, because I feel like a lot of people it's so easy to just look at within our own walls and to look everything interiorly and forget about the context, in this case, the literal geographic context of the history that we're talking about. And from Francis Talbot, the Jesuits' history of Jesuit education in Philadelphia, it's clear that Villiger was very concerned about what was going on at Girard College. And this is what we've got here. Father Villiger, it has sometimes been asserted, was impelled to it. And they're talking about Father Villiger decided that they were not going to charge tuition at St. Joe's initially. He said no tuition at St. Joe's. So he was compelled to have no tuition by his great love for the poor, by his large-hearted philanthropy, by a zeal, but it was also by a zeal to offset the disastrous effects of the irreligious Girard College, which he could see from his own front step. He was undoubtedly a philanthropist of the most elevated type, but he never forgot realities. If he wanted to have a college, and he did wish it, he was forced to have a free college. The explanation was given to him by his lawyer, and he actually quotes it to say that they would be taxed if they were going to be charging tuition, was his initial assumption, that they would be taxed. But I thought it was so curious that Stephen Girard didn't let preachers were not allowed into the walls of Girard College, even though Stephen Girard was buried out of St. John's, and Stephen Girard, wasn't the best practicing Catholic, but wasn't irreligious. He didn't hate religion, but it is something that Villiger is paying attention to when he's establishing the campus in North Philadelphia, that we can see directly into Girard College.
May I add also that it was always, as a student here, it was always my idea that, oh, when the Jesuits came up here, there was nothing here, save for Girard College, Eastern State Penitentiary, but otherwise this was, farm, field, and wilderness. And while this is mostly an artist's rendition, we'll show you some maps, some early ward maps that show that there was a small neighborhood, not what it looks like today, but there were actually people living out in this part of the city when the Jesuits made this purchase in 1866. And this is the actual deed, in a period frame, of course, hanging. This hangs in Father Swope's office, hangs in the office of the president of St. Joe's Prep.
Hey, Bill, was this area, did you say it was called Green Hill?
Yeah, it's referred to as Green Hill, and the exact roots of that I don't know, and probably Gus does, but I'm not sure. And if I knew, I forgot. This map is from 1875. This is a ward map. You can see this also. The original is framed, and it hangs in Father Swope's office. And you can see the square that the Jesuits bought in 1866 between 17th and 18th, and between Thompson and Stiles here. Sorry, I forgot, I've got a pointer. Between Stiles, 17th, Thompson, and 18th. And they bought that square for $45,000 in 1866. And this, the red arrow points to the single building, and this was Father Villiger's first church, the Church of the Holy Family. That was a combination of church, classroom space, like so many early Catholic churches and Catholic schools in the city. And then you can see just to the south of the college church building, parochial school. On later maps, this sometimes appears as St. Joseph's School, preparatory school on different maps. And then here's a Friends Meeting House, which appears on later maps and in photographs. And then this is the Episcopal Church, the St. Matthew's Church that I talked about before. And there you can see St. Joseph's Hospital, of course, which all of us know across the avenue. But Leo, if I'm not incorrect, St. Joe's Hospital was also founded by Father Barbalin, was it not?
I believe you're correct. And a few years ago, I was able to get down to the Georgetown University archives and see the archives of the Maryland province that used to be at Woodstock. And there's a letter there of one of the Jesuits involved with that $45,000 purchase. And when he writes, he's basically writing a report, I believe, to the provincial, and he says something like, well, we finally purchased the piece of land, and you won't believe it, it's $45,000. And then there were like 5 exclamation points. So people, it was pretty shocking to them that they had to spend that much money to get to a new location.
Yeah. Here is a photograph of that single building, and I use the green arrow to indicate the location of Stiles Street. So were you to follow, of course, if you know the old school, you know this well, but if you follow the Stiles Street building down Stiles Street, the Church of the Jesu would be built here in this open space. You would see the corner of the facade of the Jesu. And Father Villiger originally calls this goes through this new St. Joseph's to the Church of the Holy Family. And then eventually, when the new church is going to come, he asks Archbishop Wood if they can call the new church the Jesu. You've got Old St. Joe's, Old St. Mary's, originally a Jesuit church, and now you've got the 3. Now you've got the Church of Jesus, the Church of the Jesu in North Philadelphia.
This is something that I like to emphasize as much as possible. And actually, we had a nice opportunity last Wednesday. We had a freshman retreat, and during the day, all of the freshmen had to go play basketball, do an examen. They had a what's it called in the theater? What were they doing in the theater? improv. They were doing an improv session in the theater as well. It's kind of like this team building sort of day. And part of the day, Mr. Connors and I gave tours of the Jesu Church, and we sat them down in the pews and pointed out the different artwork and the different parts of the church, and we both loved it. Like we thought this was a great opportunity, cool opportunity. And I started each one of my tours by saying, if somebody asks you, what year did they build the church? You must look them in the eye and answer, we've never finished building the church. Okay, the church never was finished. And why do I want them to do that? Because it gets people thinking. That's a big reason. It's not just a satisfactory answer that you can kind of put away, and put and compartmentalize. And what you see there are early sketches. The one on the left is owned by the Archdiocesan Archives, and it appears to be a sketch from the architect Edwin Forrest Durang from the 1870s. So while they are still planning what they want to do, and of course, the towers are going another 25 feet or so higher in a Second Empire style. But the curious thing is that picture on the right is from the college catalog of 1901. So if they ostensibly finished the church in 1888, then why is it that, all those years later, they're still showing a style of the church that was not yet finished? And the reality of the construction of the Jesu is that a lot of it was piecemeal, and a lot of it they did plan to keep adding structures to it. There's a thesis that this was also part of Villiger's design, that he wanted to have the most beautiful, largest church, a somewhat of a floor plan copy of the Church of the Jesu in Rome, the mother church of the Jesuit order, but he didn't have enough money to pay for it while it was being built, hence why it took 9 years between when they put a cornerstone in and when they celebrate the first Mass in October of 1888, and they dedicate it in December of 1888. So he wanted to basically bore the parishioners by looking at white walls and an undecorated church, and a church that didn't have a granite facade for as long as possible, until they would actually break down from boredom and pay for the granite and pay for the marble and pay for all the artworks and pay for the fresco works and get it all done. So that's, I think, an important understanding.
If I could just point out quickly, up here in the top left corner is that building, and here they do identify it as preparatory department, that building that I had pointed out in the map. And I believe the college, as late as 1911, they're still using this image with the towers, as late as the catalog in 1911. We have those catalogs, some of those catalogs here in the archives. This is, again, that 49 aerial view. This is that parochial school, the preparatory school. This is the site of the first church with the first classrooms that eventually gets built down stiles to become the Style Street building, and then this 17th Street building, and then of course the Jesu. I use the green arrow to point out Style Street, because I think for me, as a student at the prep from 76 to 80, that concept of Style Street running straight through, I just didn't get that. So I really love this photograph, and I love to use this photograph with my students because it was not until I got this aerial view that I kind of began to understand how the prep grew, and then after the fire, how the prep grew out to Girard Avenue. I had difficulty conceptualizing that. So you'll see this image multiple times. I mentioned a little bit earlier, the Father Villiger got permission from Archbishop Wood to name the new church the Church of the Jesu, and this is the letter that we have in the archives. We have the letter from Wood on his cathedral stationery, giving his approbation for the naming of the new church, the Church of the Jesu. And then the photo on the right Leo will talk about a little bit later, I think, right, Leo, showing the first mass on October 4th, 1888. And you can see the white interior that Leo mentioned, and you could also see scaffolding there on the right hand side of the image. It's not quite done. I don't know how that got in there. So there you go. Just to remind you, if you haven't been in there for a while, this is what the interior looks like.
So if you blow up that picture from October 4th, 1888, and you take a look at the artwork that they have over the altar, and if you go ahead, Bill, to those slides that show it,
Yes.
it's the actual, it shows us that portrait of St. Patrick, and that seems to be the same painting that we have now in our St. Patrick altar. And it speaks to, so you have to kind of think like, well, why is it that if it's supposed to be a copy of the Church of the Jesu in Rome, and that most of the other distinguishing artworks that we have, at least that differentiate the church, are going to be Jesuits, like we have this beautiful altar to St. Ignatius Loyola, beautiful altars to St. Francis Xavier. So why isn't there a painting of Ignatius of Loyola directly over the altar? And if you look at the pew rents and you look at the people that were renting the pews and the parishioners, you're going to see a lot of Irish surnames in the Victorian era. And it's pretty clear that this is a big celebration for them, for that community, a community of immigrants, a community of people that were forced out of their homeland, and very, very proud that they had scraped enough nickels together and paid enough in those collection baskets and the fairs and the retreats that they had in order to have that church. And we don't know the names of everyone that built the church. We do have the name of the builder as William Welsh. And unfortunately, in 1884, there was a man that actually fell from the scaffolding or from the roof and was taken to the hospital and later died. And that's, of course, unfortunate for him and his family, but it's interesting from a historian's perspective, because that means that now we can go back and kind of stalk that person and try to figure out where he is in the census and what he's doing. And we're looking at most likely an Irish immigrant as well. So a group of people, his name was McGuire, last name was McGuire. So this celebration of basically saying like, we've created our own Catholic space here, even though we are a persecuted community in our homeland. There's the persecutions that they faced as immigrants, and the nativist riots in Philadelphia in 1844, the destruction of churches, the Catholic churches in 1844. So I think it's a really meaningful portrait to us. Maybe not the most objectively beautiful painting that we have in the church, but something that we wouldn't want to lose, because it speaks to that heritage of the group that created the church initially. And I noticed, Bill, that you used appropriation earlier. I was wondering, we're throwing out our SAT words as much as possible here. It's like a full lesson wrapped into one. Appropriation.
This is Father Ward, and I included this only because Father Ward is also one of our early presidents. Father Ward is our third president at Old St. Joe's, and then this photo is taken around 1890, and so Father Ward is living here in the Jesu, living up here and saying mass in the Jesu. So here he is with the altar boys of the Jesu. These are just a couple postcards from our postcard collection. We grab these when we see them. But again, I use the arrows to point out Style Street for those of you who may be having difficulty getting the lay of the land. The image on the left showing 18th and Styles, looking down 18th, down Styles towards 17th Street. Notice in the back of the Jesu in this black and white image, the building that we call Jesuit Hall, the Jesuit Community House, is not yet built, and that's 1912 it opened. So we're dating this somewhere around 1907, 1900-ish, and of course it's taken from the roof of a house that today is the corner of the faculty parking lot across 18th Street. And above on the right, you see the opposite view looking the other way on Stiles Street with the famed marble stairs entry there in the card, and St. Joe's Hospital down the street, the old hospital. And Villiger's grave, Villiger is buried out at Holy Cross Cemetery in Derby. I went out there a number of years ago just to check it out, that I knew that he was buried there, and I thought I would see what his grave looked like. And to my surprise, there is a large plot of Jesuits out there. Barbalin is there, Villiger is there, a number of the other early Jesuits are there, and then another 30, 40 Jesuits throughout the 20th century, the most recent being Father Peter D'Alessandro, Pater Magister, class of 1953, who I had the pleasure of teaching with when I first came back to the prep as a full-time faculty member. So Father D'Alessandro is also buried in the Jesuit plot in Holy Cross Cemetery in Derby. Leo had dug this information up that he had mentioned earlier, how prominent Villiger was, and here's Villiger's illness, front page above the fold in the New York Times, that he was a pretty prominent Jesuit. John McGreevy, the former president of Notre Dame, University of Notre Dame, and current and history professor, has written numerous books that have included the prep, the Jesu, the Jesuits of North Philadelphia in it. And one of his more recent books, if not his most recent book, had to do with 4 prominent American Jesuits that had a major impact on the Catholic Church in the United States. And one of the 4 is our guy, our Bertrand Villiger. I threw this in just because most of you probably didn't know this story, and I just find it fascinating. We recently mentioned Mother Drexel in the announcements for Women's History Month, and this is from the 1904 scrapbooks. We have scrapbooks going back to 1892 in the archives, and these scrapbooks are what I always assume was probably one of the retired Jesuits or a secretary. Every time St. Joe's pops up in the newspaper, they clipped it out and they glued it into a scrapbook. And so we have a century's worth of scrapbooks. And sometimes if I'm procrastinating and I don't want to grade my sophomore quizzes, I'll flip through the old scrapbooks. And I discovered this, these 2 ambitious red men take college course. These are 2 young men who were proteges of Mother Drexel, who of course, had missions with Native people, missions with African Americans in the South, the Navajo Nation down in St. Michael's in Arizona, and the Navajo Nation. But these 2 young men were at the Carlisle Indian School. Mother Drexel arranged for them to come to St. Joe's to round out their curriculum. But of course, they came right at the beginning of football season, and they left right after the last game. And it turns out they were really quick runners, and they scored a lot of points. And so we have some of the box scores, and it's 1904, and it's not real clear. There's mention of the preparatory school and the preparatory team. There was a football team in 1904. It's still not real clear to me whether the college had its own separate teams, or in 1904 they're kind of all mixed in. But we do know that these 2 young men played for St. Joseph's in the 1904 season, and had some success.
Yeah, it's one of, like Bill's saying, it's one of our connections with the great Saint Catherine Drexel. And her father also famously gave in his will what amounted to $72,000 to St. Joseph's in the 1880s during the construction of the church, for which we kind of surmise that the roof of the Church of the Jesu was built with that donation. And I recently did one of those inflation calculators, and it suggested that $72,000 in 1884 would maybe be about $2 million or so today. Now, how that actually plays out is, of course, like a controversial and difficult sort of thing to do, but that's a great deal of money that the Drexel family gave to our organization.
This is a ward map. Again, we have this in our collection, and from 1907. And I want to include this because it just shows the growth of the school. The Stiles Street building and the 17th Street building are complete. Here is the St. Joseph's. Here it's labeled St. Joseph's School. No Jesuit Hall yet, no community house yet on the north side of the church. And the building that today is the Jesu School, the building that some of you guys remember as your high school, that building is not yet constructed. And then here is the open yard, the courtyard, the playground, the intramural yard where we played intramural, touch football back in the late 70s. You can see clearly here in 1907. And then along comes Jesuit Hall, the residence opened in 1912, that housed the Jesuits from 1912, around September of 1912, from what we can tell, until sometime in the summer of 1980, when there were just too few Jesuits to keep the place going. And then for the most part, mothballed for 25 years. I know JVC, Jesuit Volunteer Corps, used this building. Bob Casey Jr. lived here when he was in the JVC, and our Alumni Service Corps used it in the early years, I know, and the Jesu School used it for some things as well, but for the most part, it was mostly empty for all of those years until 06, 07, money being raised, and then the major renovation. That was under Father Bidinger, and then Father Bill Byron, and then George Burr, that we moved into this building. Fantastic structure. And you can see in this slide what is now the Jesu School, the old St. Joe's Prep. It's not there yet. It won't come for another 10 years. And this is just the interior. For those of you who maybe have not yet had a chance to come down since Jesuit Hall, the old residence, was renovated, this is what the first floor looks like. We've tried to put some photos of some of the Jesuits, some of the men who lived in the house, so that the students could get an idea of what this building was meant to be, but also for the rest of us to see many of our teachers, former teachers, on the wall here on the first floor of Jesuit Hall. And if you haven't had a chance to come down, when all of this is over and the pandemic settles, please get in touch with Kevin or Leo or me, because we love to show you around. It's a lot more fun to see it in person.
So at the same time that they finished Jesuit Hall, they invited this Jesuit brother, Francis Schrone. He was actually another immigrant. He immigrated from Germany. And when he came to the United States, he was a tailor for a period of time, and then he became an interior designer and a painter. And he lost a child and his wife at basically one right after the other, and had a spiritual conversion. A long route. He actually was first really drawn to like the spiritualist movement in the Victorian age, and he then decided that he wanted to become a Jesuit priest after he was turned off by that. And the Jesuits put him to work and sent him all over the country decorating different churches. His daughter was married at the Church of the Jesu the day after Christmas, 1912, and then he seems to have worked in the basement of the Jesu, mixing plaster and canvas and doing all of the faux fresco work that goes all throughout the church. And sets up famously maybe the most infamous story of what happened in the Jesu, which I think is the next slide there, which is that he took two paintings from these two famous Polish artists, Jan Sticka and Wojciech Pajkowski, and he glued them to the walls of the Jesu. And if you can go to the next slide, you'll see the consequences. Well, that's the crucifixion by Pajkowski that was glued to the wall. And this is from the New York Times in 1939, where Jan Sticka, the painter of Our Lady of Poland, the painting pictured there, and that is up on the altar in the Jesu, presumably glued to the wall by Francis Shrone. His son, Jan Sticka's son, showed up at the Church of the Jesu in 1939 and seems to have wanted the painting back again and discover it for the family. And although it doesn't explicitly say so in the article, by the 1960s, the pastor of the Church of the Jesu was remarking that it seems like, oh, well, he must have seen that it was glued to the wall and figured that he could not take it back. Curiously, this happened in the summer of 1939 when Jan Sticka showed up. But in March of that very same year, before this happened, a assessor from an insurance company was in the Jesu going through all of the artwork and wrote in his report to the pastor that most of the artwork isn't really worth anything, but those two paintings that are glued to the wall are obviously really worth something and really beautiful, noteworthy paintings. So I thought that was maybe too much to be a coincidence that that's exactly when people started noting that these beautiful paintings are there.
We're in 1918 now, and this is the fall of 1918. This is the prep football team. The young man in the circle is Anthony Scanlon, Scanlon, who starred here at the prep and then went on to become the great football coach at the prep before he headed off to Holy Cross. Of course, he sent all of his sons and many of his grandsons to St. Joe's Prep. This team is also notable, not just because Ank Scanlon is in the photograph, but also this is the team that did not play a season because of the great, what was called the Spanish influenza in the fall of 1918. I mentioned the scrapbooks that we have, and as you might imagine, half the scrapbooks are sports and half the sports is football. Every game is covered from 3 different newspapers, and they covered, prep Roman Catholic games like they cover the Eagles today. Lots of sports, except for the fall of 1918. Nary a mention. I think they played one kind of all-star game, like against alumni, and that was it because of the pandemic. The notation here on the left-hand side comes from the daybooks of the Jesuits. Leo doesn't have these, but I do. The Jesuits would keep annual records of what's going on in the school, plus what's going on in the Jesuit community. So we have these books going back well over a century. And in the daybook from the fall of 1918, you can see that I just bullet pointed these. On the 4th of October, school closed. School won't reopen until the 28th of October, with a third of the students remaining virtual. And 2 teachers were at death's door in early October, although all of the students and all of the faculty of the prep survived the flu. Come November, no one was allowed in the building if they did not have a vaccination. And in the end, in the Spanish flu took around 12,000 Philadelphians. And as of the other day, COVID-19 had taken around 3,100 Philadelphians.
So one of the things that's great about this St. Joe's Prep history is that a lot of things are still being discovered, and there's a lot of things that have been digitized. And so, for example, that document that we had copied, we were not aware of until we started digging into this story of the influenza at St. Joe's. And that is from a list that's at the Catholic Archives at Villanova, which they just recently made available free online. And you can use those to search for all sorts of stories that happened in Catholic institutions throughout Philadelphia, and they're full text searchable. And somebody compiled a document in the 1920s to list out all of the Sisters of St. Joseph who had passed away because of influenza, who died during the pandemic. And when I first was looking into the history of St. Joe's Prep during the Spanish influenza in 1918, the only thing I really found that Talbot said about it was that one paragraph here: the college was ordered quarantined by the War Department, and almost half the student corps was stricken down and had to be removed to nearby St. Joe's Hospital. And then this incredible sentence: under the providence of God, there were no fatalities. And so I thought that was interesting, because this guy is writing in 1927. And we did discover that, unfortunately, one of the teachers who happened to be a sister, she was in her 20s, passed away because of Spanish influenza, and it appears to have been teaching at what we would now, I guess, consider the Jesuit school, but was part of the whole community there. The lines, like Bill was talking about earlier, the lines before 1919 were particularly blurred. There were actually, Talbot talks about how there were kids the age of 12 who were technically enrolled in the college, the way that they used to have it set up in the Victorian day. Anyway, so I was able to figure out who she was, and there's actually a candy store that's still in existence in Reading, which in her family's candy store, the Ziff Candies. That's who she actually was. She's related to them. I'm not sure. I know that there is a Ziff Candies in Germantown still to this day, but I'm not sure if those are actually related. I'd be interested if anybody knew if that's the same family, and that family might be interested that we had this connection to the pandemic. These pictures also talk about what was going on on the campus in 1918. So in October of 1918, not only did the school have to shut down because everybody got sick, but the campus was converted into the Students' Army Training Corps, which was happening to a lot of Catholic colleges across the country in 1918. People did not understand in the fall of 1918 that the war was going to end with the armistice November 11th, 1918. And there was a expectation that many officers trained in the military arts and a lot of people, particular skills like being able to speak with the Allies or even negotiate with the Germans, would have to be sent over for maybe many more years of war in the First World War. And that's what happened to our campus in 1918, is every man that was on the college campus was sworn in to the Army and the Students' Army Training Corps October 1st, 1918.
So now we have 100 years in 10 minutes. So
yeah,
we're going to pick up the pace a little bit.
We will.
I included this. We have the original hand-drawn sketch of this advertising a game between the Prep and Roman in January of 1919. But of course, this is after winter break, after Christmas break, that the pandemic, everybody comes back in early November, and then life goes on. We beat Roman 26-20, by the way. And again,
high-scoring game.
There's the campus. This is an ad from the scrapbooks of the scholarship exam for the Prep being given. But I included this because if you look down at the bottom, it shows the locations outside of the Prep where one could take the test. And they're as far away as the Cathedral School in Wilmington, Delaware, and St. Michael's in Chester. And we have records, of course, of guys coming from across the river from South Jersey before the building of the Benjamin Franklin Bridge opening in 1926. So we had guys taking the ferry every day from South Jersey, but that we were reaching out. So the reach of the prep is growing, and we're reaching out by the 20s as far as Wilmington. This is a ward map in 1922. The green arrow is pointing to the place where, again, what we today call the Jesu School, but if you were here before the fire, you would have called it the high school. And there is the location of the high school building, not yet completed. But in 23, the new high school, Villiger Hall, as it was called in the very beginning, opens up. And of course, the shot on the left is the opening of the new building, and the shot on the right is what it looks like today as the Jesu School. And of course, the entrance halfway down Thompson Street, still carved in stone above the entrance, St. Joseph's Preparatory School in the old building. 1926, Prep fielded its first crew team and have had a fair amount of success with that in the last century. And I want to include this too, because it shows almost a century of one family's connection to the Prep. This is the freshman photograph of the freshman homeroom of Charles Morris, class of 1929. This photo taken in the 25-26 school year. Charles Morris in the yellow circle, that's Speedy Morris's father. Speedy, Bill Morris went to Roman Catholic, but Speedy Morris's dad, Charlie, is a Prep grad, and his uncle Bill, after whom he is named, Bill Morris, I believe, is class of 1927, and Speedy's father, Charlie, class of 1929. Speedy donated this photograph of his dad's homeroom. There's a little check mark next to Charlie's face. Speedy donated this family photograph to the archives. Actually, he donated all of his father's Prep material recently when he retired. And in 1926 is the big split. The college moves to the new campus on City Avenue. Plans had been underway going back to 1922. We have an original copy of this plan on the left. And so 27, the college moves to City Avenue, and the Prep gets all of the buildings all to ourselves. Father Albert Brown in the photo with Charles A. Lindbergh is the last Jesuit to be the president of the Prep and the president of the college. I recently found this. This is our first bowling team. This is 1938, comes from the scrapbooks. It looks like we're not quite a team yet, but this is laying the groundwork for St. Joe's Prep bowling in 1938.
In our rehearsal, we decided to include that to give a shout out to the South Philadelphians that went to St. Joe's Prep. That was the goal.
We included these census tract maps because the integration of the parish and the integration of the neighborhood also has an impact on the integration of St. Joe's Prep. As you can see from the 40 and 50 census, after the late 1930s, Pennsylvania does away with restrictive covenants. And so this neighborhood begins to integrate fairly rapidly, as does the parish of the Church of the Jesu integrates fairly rapidly, so that by 1956, St. Joe's Prep welcomes its first two Black freshmen, one of whom was Roy Lee Reese. Dr. Reese currently lives, I believe he's living in Maryland. I forget, he was up visiting recently, but Dr. Reese is one of our first two, and these two young men graduated together in 1960.
So this is a photo of the neighborhood association that Anna McGarry helped coordinate and created. And we have a great description of her from a Jesuit, William Perkins, who described her as, quote, a tiny, spunky woman Mrs. McGarry organized her white and black neighbors against both blockbusting speculators and bigoted pastors. While others fled to the suburbs, Anna chose to stay, remaining an active community leader well into her 80s. So interestingly, he did this, that the Jesuit that wrote that about her, William Perkins, was not just critiquing other people being blockbusters, but also critiquing, he says, pastors, bigoted pastors, because one of the guys that Anna McGarry fought with was Father McGuire, who was also a president of the Prep and the pastor of the Jesu Church, who had a different neighborhood organization, which is in McGreevy's book, Parish Boundaries, written extensively about it, where he was trying to keep the neighborhood white. He was trying to keep Jesu parishioners from selling to African-American families. And by 1942, that was embarrassing to the Jesuits. The Jesuits decided that they needed to get him out of that post. And even Cardinal Doherty spoke against it. The leaders of the Catholic worker movement were made aware of it. So it was something that was a real problem in the parish, and McGarry was on the other side. And her papers, another development that's going on right now, we just reached out to DePaul University. We have some of her papers and her neighborhood association's papers, but the main part of her collection was donated to DePaul University, and we just reached out to them, and they're going to give us copies of that. And they also have recordings of her speeches. So I'm really excited to see what they actually have from her about that, those materials.
Of course, the long time awaited for Catholic League champion basketball team in 1962, led by Dutch Doyle. And you can see young Eddie Burke and Matt Kukas and a young Jim O'Brien, number 25, and Joe Donahue. And here on the priest on the left is Father John Donahoe of the Society of Jesus, who stepped in. Mr. Doyle had to go to the hospital. I think he may have had a heart attack. Probably some of you know better. He had a minor heart attack, and so Father Donahoe stepped in and took over the running of the team in this championship season. The sweater on the right is the sweater of Joe Donahue of the class of 1963. We have the letter that Dutch wrote to Father Donahoe to read to the boys in the locker room before the big game, and it's pretty cool stuff. And of course, in January, at the end of January 1966, the fire that sparked and so badly destroyed 2/3 of the oldest buildings on the campus that the buildings had to come down. And some of you remember quite well what that was like, cramming the entire school into a very limited space and living through that for until the fall of 1968, when the new cinder block prep, my prep, opened in the fall of 1968. So a couple of these slides just show the construction and the design for the new building. I wanted to briefly mention this. If you recall this when you were a student, the Christ of North Philadelphia, it has been reinstalled, and the crucified Christ figure has been returned from Baltimore. Father Swope helped engineer the return of Jesus to Baltimore. So again, when the pandemic is over and you want to come in and check it out, please get in touch because we'd love to show you. I wanted to quickly highlight a couple of pictures of the Harringtons, because probably many of you know Tom and the role Tom played, maybe not as a student, but as a dad with Tom III. of the class of '69. Tom Harrington Jr. was very active in the Fathers Club. As a student in the late '70s, I always saw this bust of Tom Harrington in the library. I always thought it was John Kennedy. I never had any idea who it was and why it was there. I assumed it was JFK. And of course, much later, I learned that it was Tom Harrington III, who sadly was killed in an automobile accident in the spring of senior year. This is Tom in the library with the rest of the student council. And some of you may remember the old pep rallies in the back schoolyard. This also is Tom Harrington is probably up there on the balcony with the student council firing up the crowd. And then Tom's younger brother, Dick Harrington, also very, very active on campus, and that kept Mr. and Mrs. Harrington both active on the preps campus. And I had to get Mr. Dugan in there and Father Garber, chemistry teacher extraordinaire to generations of preppers. Some of you may remember, if you're from around my time, this is John Solera at the Vet in January of '78 in that great city championship, the last great city championship game. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention two early international programs. One, I believe it might have been Mike Moscow who helped get started the German exchange in the early 1970s, early to mid 1970s. And Henry Bender of the class of '63, who started a summer classical program around that same time, I believe in the 1974, 1975. Henry, if you're there, you can correct me. This photo is the summer of 1979. I'm the kid in the middle at the Phillies t-shirt with a full head of hair. And some of my classmates who may be on this call, Joe Gaggs and Don Wall and Joe Cleary. There we are. That's Father Tom Roach in the lower left-hand corner, who was our principal, a German teacher and principal of the prep at the time. And just a reminder of what those great jackets look like in the '70s and '80s. This is the class of 1981, photographed by Father Vince Taggart. Vince photographed every homeroom. Vince photographed every event. And here's Vince with Ed Rendell down at the river. Vince, a great fan and supporter of Prep Crew, right to the end. Pat Kaiser's jersey. Pat Kaiser, when he graduated, was the highest, the point leader in school history as a runner and kicker. And this is the jersey of Pat Cardish of the class of 2011, the last time the prep won the Catholic League championship in soccer, and the first time since the 1920s that the prep had won the Catholic League championship in soccer. Both Pats donated their jerseys to the Villiger archives. And probably some of you know that Ken Kania recently retired. He retired at the end of 2020. But here's some pictures of brother from the '60s, the '70s, and more recently. The guy's still sharp as a tack. And that's what we look like now.
Yeah.
And
before we turn it over to Q&A, I just wanted to throw a couple things out there too, because I know a lot of people on the call are enthusiasts, and they know a lot of the history, and there are some things that we just have that are kind of mysteries to us, and it's not due to lack of trying or it's not that we don't have a lot of documents. For example, back in the fall of 2019, the whole question as to who actually stole those paintings and where did they steal them from, where was the scene of the crime, it rose back up again, and we don't have good answers about that. In fact, it seems the one New York Times article that we showed about the Our Lady of Poland painting claims that painting was put on display at the Chicago Exposition. And that doesn't really seem to be true. It's not in any of the catalogs for the Chicago Exposition. I did find Jan Sticka's transcription of his diary, where he talks about coming to America with his paintings and paintings being destroyed in a fire. And he does mention that his low opinion of Americans, he thinks that we're all lawless thieves. He even uses the word thieves, but he never says that that painting was stolen during his lifetime. And at some point, his son thinks it's stolen and comes and finds it. The same with the crucifixion painting as well. We thought that it was at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904 and maybe stolen there, but we can't find it in an exposition. I even sent an email to a man that wrote a book about the 1904 St. Louis Exposition, and he basically told us that it's a very difficult thing to try to prove because there were so many different pavilions at that. So it could have been in the Austrian pavilion, it could have been other places. So I just wanted to throw, that's one of the mysteries that we're working on now, is can anybody find the description of that painting actually being stolen, and where was it stolen, and who did it? If anybody's ancestor stole the painting, we'd be very interested in knowing that now. It's beyond the statute of limitations, I think. So you can come clean with it. Maybe it was a Connor's ancestor and you're hiding it this whole time, throwing us off the scent from it. I saw a lot of questions. Are you good to open up to questions?
Yeah, I wanted to first, though, hand it over to the legend himself, Mr. Gus Cooney. I really wanted, Gus, if you could, I would love your memories and any stories you have from the fire. Obviously, one of the bigger, kind of the more momentous moments in prep history. So Gus, anything you could tell us about or memories from that, obviously living through it firsthand and working at the prep during that time?
Well, the fire was certainly a shock to all of us. Nobody anticipated a fire, but in retrospect, it I think was the best thing that's happened to the prep in the 20th century. It's given them, just changed the whole perspective. As you know, the prep had acquired the land from Style Street south to Girard Avenue between 17th and 18th Streets from the Redevelopment Authority, and that die was cast that the prep was going to build there, and they were going to build a library and some science labs and a cafeteria, and keep the rest of the old facilities intact. So the fire changed all of that. They had to go back to the drawing board and do a complete new development and to build an entire new school. Surviving those years, there many of the classes, guys going back from the class of 66 to the class of 72, all endured the hardships. It was crowded. We were all basically in that building on Thompson Street. There were a couple of classes going on in the convent across the street on the east side of 17th Street across from the prep. I think there were 2 freshman classes over there, but the rest was in that building. We all survived. Somehow 850 of us all made it happen, and it wasn't easy. We put up with all the noise of the demolition and then the construction, and that is a dirty mess. When you have an old building where you need ventilate, you open the windows for ventilation. So it was a very noisy time, and it was just a delight to get into the new building. The people involved at the time, the faculty, Father Joe Aid, Father Tony Zeitz came in 68 to complete the building construction. Father Larry Hack was there before that. a lot of people pulled together. One of the interesting stories, I think, I went down to the prep the Monday after the fire, put the chains on the car, and off we went. All the schools in Philadelphia were closed for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of that week. It was, we had, I don't know, 10 inches of snow or more. And so they were working. People were in there trying to decide whether they were going to tear the buildings down, were they salvageable. And one of the things that occurred, and well, I might say, I took our oldest son at the time, who was about 5 years old, took his fireman's hat, and we went down to see the remains of the fire. So he still remembers that. That's our son Byrne, who got out of the prep in '79 and played on that city championship team that Bill Connors talked about a little earlier. But that Monday, we went down, and who was there but Joe Dugan, and Father Hack was the president of the prep, and Father Aid, the principal, and they were talking to the fire people and building contractors about, what we're going to do. We're going to tear this down. What can we save? What can't we save? And the word came around. Dukes and I were listening to them talk, and they decided, well, it's not salvageable, so we're going to tear it down. Joe Dugan went and found one of the contractors had a gigantic pair of wire cutters, and he went into the building on the first floor of the 17th Street building that where the chapel was, and the chapel had 3 big stained glass windows, and in one of the windows, in the center of the stained glass window, was the prep seal. And Joe Dugan went in and cut a big hole in the stained glass window, cut all the lead surroundings of it, and just took the seal out. He comes out with the seal, and at that point, somebody said, they think they're going to save this building. They're not going to tear it down. So here's Joe Dugan having cut out, destroyed a stained glass window with the prep seal in it. But that seal is now in the door of the prep chapel in the prep building that's off the foyer at the main entrance. So that's a fire story. Just some of the names you mentioned. Mentioned Peter D'Alessandro. Pete and I were classmates at the prep. I taught Leroy Reese when he was a student at the prep in sophomore year. And I'll send you fellows a note about one of those things. I think there was a black student that was admitted in the class of '54, and I think he only stayed 1 semester. He never graduated. He was in my brother's class, so that's how I know that. Okay. When you're talking about St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, and we're talking about Green Hill, I think is the name of the community. I always remembered that in the announcement board that was outside of St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, it says St. Matthew's Episcopal Church, Francisville. And as you know, Francisville is the section of the city just south of Girard Avenue, and was originally William Penn's vineyards, right, and was named after his son, Francis Penn. The scrapbooks you have from 1919 are basically from Charlie Bonnage, I would suspect. Okay. And if it looks like I lost the picture, but can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. I think many of the things you have, when I was still at the prep, we tried to preserve a lot of material, and Marlou DeRatius was a big help. She used to come in every summer and work 6-7 weeks just trying to preserve that. Marlou is the wife of Fran DeRatius, longtime chemistry teacher at the prep. You also mentioned the Drexel family and Mother Catherine Drexel, and I just note that two prep grads, Lou Welsh and his brother John. They were twins, class of 1948. They were ear, nose, and throat surgeons, and they certified. They were certificators for the canonization of Catherine Drexel for beatification. They were called into the case to document the miracles that happened to, I think it was a female, a woman, a girl who was cured, and it was one of the miracles that were applied and verified for Catherine Drexel's canonization. So it, the prep had a connection in that part of it. And Bill was talking about Style Street and that being there, and as you know, and was on those street sketches. So there was another little street in there called Flora Street. So there were two streets parallel to Girard Avenue and Style Street between Styles and Girard. And some of the Episcopal Church, I was involved in purchasing that church from the Episcopal diocese. That's an interesting story in itself. But it was a great little church. It was a beautiful church inside. And after we bought it, it still had all the vestments were still there, and candelabras and candlesticks and all the functioning equipment for the Episcopal Mass. Even though it had been used by a black church for a while, they continued to keep that stuff there. So there are just some comments. Bill was talking about the kids who came from New Jersey, from Camden and Trenton, and that was true in my time. And when I was a kid, part of the scholarship entrance exam was not only scholarships for students from the Philadelphia Archdiocese, but also from the Camden and Trenton diocese. I think there was one each for the Trenton and the Camden diocese. So it was one of the reasons why we always got a good many kids from those classes.
Gus, could I ask you a quick question? Eileen Tannenbaum joined the call, and her dad was one of the firefighters who answered the call that day in January, and she was wondering, how long did the school close after the fire?
It was closed for 5 days.
5 days.
5 days, and 3 of those days were snow days. Every school in Philadelphia was closed for 3 days, and we opened up that the following Monday morning. It was we were in the Thompson Street building. The floors were warped from all the water. They dried it out. They still had big fans and trying to dry out the place, and back to school.
Yeah.
Back to school we went. The basement of the building was filled with water. They pumped it, as you know, in the Thompson Street building. The pool was in half of that building. It was in the basement was the swimming pool, and they pumped out the swimming pool, and that became the band room.
Right.
Band never sounded better in that, and the deck of the pool became the trainer's room and the area for athletic teams to dress and change for the football team to go out to practice in Fairmount Park, or in Fairmount Park.
Yeah.
So we were only closed 5 days. They brought in a fellow contractor. He built some. His name was Clem Mossop, Mossop. He had a son, I think Joe Mossop, who I taught, and he was just dynamic. He got us back. For the most part, I don't think we had electrical lighting for a week or so, but they got electricity back, got heat back, and off we went.
A few other questions, obviously, about surrounding the fire and the Jesu, and this could be for any of you guys. The prep owns the Jesu. Who was it bought from? How did that all work, and how does that stand today?
That's an interesting story. When we wanted to, when I say we, when I'm at St. Joseph's Prep, wanted to restore the Jesu back in the 80s before the 100th anniversary, the roof was leaking, the paint was peeling, it was in tough shape. We wrote to the archdiocese and told them that we wanted to do that, and they got back to us and said something to the effect that are they sure that we owned it? And we said, we're sure we own it. We have a deed that says we own it. So they went and looked and said, sure enough, we do own it. Now, originally the owner, the legal owner, was St. Joseph's College. And as you know, the prep and the college were one legal institution until 1967, when the prep separately incorporated from St. Joseph's College. And the story, I think, was that goes back to the days of Archbishop Wood, when the Jesu was to be built, and who was to be the owner. Because as you know, in those days, and I think may still be the case, the archdiocese owns every parish. They have legal title to every church and school. They don't own Roman Catholic. That's a separate. I'm not sure they own Hallahan, but those other archdiocese schools they have title to, and the Jesuit rector at the time of the Jesu being built went to the archdiocese and said that this was the property of St. Joseph's College, and the archdiocese said, well, it's our rule that we own everything. And the Jesuit rector said that not only was the Jesu Church and its predecessor, the Church of the Holy Family, a parish church, but it was also the college chapel and the chapel for the Jesuit community. So therefore, it belonged to St. Joseph's College. And evidently Archbishop Wood agreed, and the prep and the college continued to had title to it. Now, I think there may be some issue whether the college still technically owns the ground on which the Jesu and the rectory are. I mean, I've been out of the prep for over 20 years now, so I don't know whether that's ever been resolved, but I don't think it's a big problem. But in those, back in the days, when I was there, the presidents of the St. Joseph's College, physically it's yours. We don't want it, and we don't want we don't want the expense of it. It's yours. So, so we went ahead and did all that restoration work with the Jazoo, with the outside of the building and the only thing inside, I think, well, with that technically, we had to restore some of the stained glass windows that were sagging, and that was done internally. And just after I left the prep, they did a lot of electrical work on the inside of the building. That was in the process when I was leaving. But I think it's either the prep or the college, and I suspect Mark Reed would prefer that you have ownership.
There's actually a story in Gormley's book, and if I recall, Gormley thought that it was funny that the college basically sold it to the prep twice. I should put sold it.
Yes.
With any exchange of money, but Gormley thought it was funny that they signed it over once and then they forgot that they signed it over, and they must have been anxious to make sure it was signed over a second time.
Yeah, I think the college did not want it, but I guess as you know, when the college moved out to City Line in 1927, the Jesuits that taught at the college continued to live at 18th and Thompson. And they did that until, I think, the early 1940s. So from 1927 until right around the beginning of the Second World War, the Jesuits, all the Jesuits who were teaching at the prep and the college lived in that community rectory building at 18th and Thompson.
Okay, so we're coming up on 7 p.m. here. I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I didn't know, Bill, Leo, Gus, I don't know if you had any final thoughts, things you wanted to share, questions you might have seen that you wanted to answer, but I'll pass it over to you for a couple final things, and otherwise we'll get going.
I would just repeat, if anyone wants, when things settle down, please get in touch, and we'd love to show you what we have. If you haven't been back to campus for a while, we'd love to show you what's new in the JZoo, what's new on campus. You're always welcome back. We'd love to have you.
Hey, Bill.
Yes, sir.
This is Chris Tretta.
Yes, sir.
I just had a
Did
question.
you go to the prep, sir?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Chris Tretta, I've never heard
A
of him.
long time ago.
I don't know
A
whether
really
Gus-
long time ago.
I don't know whether Gus can see this or not, but I'm going to hold this up and ask you
Ooh.
gentlemen if you know what that is.
I think I know what it
Marble
is.
stairs.
Yeah.
So my two older brothers, class of 66 and 67, were among the group of people. They went down there 5 days after the fire. And I begged them to take me with them, but I think they thought the snow was too deep. I might get lost. But they did come back with some of this, and the statute, Mr. Vaccaro, the statute of limitations is run on this. So
Yeah.
this is mine.
Yeah.
That's from the famous marble staircase.
Yeah.
I have a brick here, Chris, from the prep still.
I can't see you, but it's great to hear your voice.
Leo and Bill, you
Well,
may
it's-
want to
it's,
tap into
nice that I
Gus
can
there
still
and get
speak.
his oral histories lined up, you know.
Yes. I'm with you, Steve.
If
You may
Leo
wanna do
and
that,
Bill,
yeah.
you've done a very great job. Kevin, just keeping those two guys in order and keeping them from causing a food fight.
Yeah.
Great job.
Harder than it looks. It's harder than it
Yeah.
looks.
It's hard to manage us. He followed our rider very closely.
Leo, anything you want to say?
Oh yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. I saw that there's a whole lot of experts here. There were a lot of good questions. I saw Father Burr was asking if we thought that building the J2 was maybe too expensive, which is what which is what Francis Talbot thought in 1927, but I totally disagree. I think the Jesu actually, the pew rents and the collections actually paid for the whole thing, and that initially the Victorian prep and college were tuition free for a period of time because they had that parish, they had a captive audience to fundraise for. So, and then I saw there was a question, I'm not sure the answer of. It might be in Cantasta's book, or maybe Gus or Bill know. I saw somebody was asking why crimson and gray. Does anybody know the symbolic importance of crimson and gray? Is it like crimson for valor and gray for the gray hairs that you get for studying?
Leo, I seem to remember a Jesuit one time in a sermon or homily talking about how it came to be crimson and gray, but it escapes me, and I don't know whether he was putting some literary license to this and creating more of it, but I don't know.
Yeah, you don't know. He could have been in the lounge the night before, and they were egging him on. Oh, you should really invent some story for Crimson and Gray tomorrow.
Yeah. But
I think a lot of the other questions we got to, though.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you guys did a wonderful job. You know, I mentioned this to Bill and Leo earlier, but I know they would be more than happy, as would I, and I'm sure Gus would as well. If you have any questions or you're interested in other things about the history of the prep, obviously feel free to come down to the prep when things start to clear up. But we're also, you know, everyone's an email away, and if you have any questions or things you'd love to learn more about, you know, I'm sure all of us would love to inform you as much as we can. I'm going to call it there. It's 7:05.
Yeah.
It was a great evening. Thank you to Bill. Thank you to Leo. Thank you to Gus for
Thank you.
lending your insights. And thank you to all of you for being on the call with us tonight. Really appreciate it. You know, hopefully the next time we do something like this, it's in person and we can, you know, shake hands and maybe have a drink and enjoy each other's companies. But until then, I will say good night. I will say thank you, and I will say go prep. So thanks,
prep.
everyone.
okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. That was a
Go
lot of
prep.
fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go
Great to
prep.
see you, Gus.
Thanks, awesome.